Okay, we can start. We'd love to hear about your adventure. Can you tell us about the beginning of your career? How did you discover your interest in organizational behavior?
Well, I guess if we're going to start at the very beginning, I was an undergraduate student in the 1960s at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And it was then and still is a very strong psychology department. All our courses had laboratories. And although I didn't have the best grades, one of my professors discovered that I was very creative in coming up with original experiments. And so I became the very first undergraduate to be asked to be a research assistant. So that was a huge honor. And it turned out he was a clinical psychologist, not an industrial organizational psychologist. And he was having me assist him with his various clients. And much to my shame, one day I made a derogatory comment to my mentor about this one client that he was treating. And the next day I walked into the laboratory, and there on my desk was an article by Brayfield and Crockett. It's still a very famous article. It was written back in the 1950s on the relationship of job performance and job satisfaction. And I read the article and I leaped up, I raced into my mentor's office. I said, Dr. Beach, I just read this terrific article. I want to become an industrial organizational psychologist. Now, needless to say, he's the one who put the article on my desk. He's the one who figured I probably wouldn't be a very good clinician. And he said, Gary, let's sit down and talk about that. And in those days, there was no IO program in Canada. So he said, let's see about you applying to school in the United States. So the following year was 1967. I went to Georgia Tech, which again, to this day, has a very strong IO, industrial organizational psychology program. And I developed a close relationship with another person who became my mentor named Dr. Ronan. And the end of the first year, summer, he was hired by the American Pulpwood Association. That's forest products, PULPWOOD, which is skinny logs in the southern United States. And he said, I'll become a consultant to you if you'll hire my research assistant as your research assistant. So that got me immediately involved working with employees as an intern, and I absolutely loved it. And so the rest is kind of history. And by the way, that's where I did my first goal setting studies.
Yeah, that's great.
And I've never stopped. And now I'm in my mid 70s, about to head into my late 70s as of next week.
Okay.
Thank you so much. You president over many institutions, organizational life is your business. I ask not bluntly how much you care about evidence-based practice. How did you balance theory and practice?
How do I balance theory and practice?
Yes.
Oh, well, I'll go back again to when I was your age. What I loved about theory is that it provides a framework for me to figure out what are the causal relationships that I might be able to apply in a work setting. And most importantly, what are the moderators? Synonym for moderators are boundary variables or conditional variables. So what are the boundaries within which this causal or causal relationships work before I started to do the experiment? And then in other cases, I'm more in favor of inductive theory building opposed to deductive theory building. And I would start looking at the results of my experiments and say, okay, now, is there a clear causal relationship there? Again, what are the moderators? Importantly, what are the mediators that explain the causal relationships? So I've always been a strong supporter of using theory as a guideline or a framework for doing research. And then, by the way, if it doesn't work, and you go, darn, what happened? This was a bust. All I've got are null hypotheses. So I'll look to the theory to help explain what is it I missed? What did I screw up? What is it I didn't pay enough attention to? And theory is a valuable guideline in that regard.
Okay. My next question is about Edwin Locke and goal setting theory.
Okay.
You put forward a theory that made a sound with Edwin Locke, goal setting theory. I met Edwin Locke last year.
Oh, did you? Good.
Yes. We invited him to a seminar at my university. Now I am asking you this question. I am so excited. In an interview, you mentioned that this is considered your most important achievement in the behavioral sciences. If I were to ask you the essence of this theory, what would your answer be?
Well, it's very straightforward. A really good theory specifies the causal relationships, specifies the moderators, which I just explained are conditional variables or boundary variables within which the causality occurs. And then finally specifies the mediators that explain the causal relationships. So causal relationship, specific, high, or challenging goals lead to higher performance, significantly higher performance than easy goals, no goals, or even an abstract or vague goal such as to do your best. Now, what are the moderators? So this causal relationship only exists if there are four moderators or four conditions. One, the person or team has to have the ability to attain the goal. Two, the person or team needs to be committed to goal pursuit. If you're not committed, you've set the goal and you're not committed, by definition, you don't have a goal. Okay, third, you need to receive performance feedback or knowledge of results as to how well you're doing or not doing, so you can change course if necessary. And fourth, finally, there can't be any situational constraints. To say it more positively, you need to have the resources necessary in the situation to attain the goal. So those are the four moderator variables. Now you go, what explains the effectiveness of goal setting? And that's saying, what are the mediators? And again, there are four. One is choice to focus on X versus Y versus, do you say Z or Z in Turkey? Because in Canada, we say Z. In the United States, they say Z. So the choice is, we're going to choose to focus on X, Y, or ZZ. The next is effort. If you set high goals, you exert more effort. Next is persistence. If you're committed to the goal, you'll persist until you attain it. And lastly, and I could have said this first, but off the top of my head, it came out last, you develop a strategy or plan for attaining the goal. So those four explain why goal setting is so effective in motivating people to really go out and try to make something of their lives.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Time is very precious in a changing world. As of today's youth, we feel that we are in a race. Naturally, this affects our motivation. How do you evaluate it? This within the scope of goal setting theory.
Well, you're right. Time is getting shorter and shorter. So in some ways, I'll repeat myself in terms of the theory. Number one, kids today have to make choices much earlier than, say, my grandparents or your grandparents. So early on, number one is you got to make choices. And you have to be clear on those choices. Then two, once you've made the choices, you need to prioritize. Then once you prioritize, you're going to set the specific high goal and you're going to exert effort and you're going to persist until you make those priorities attainable. And then again, I should have said this one first rather than last. Once you make your choices, you got to develop a plan. So anyone can say, I want to be a millionaire by the time I'm 25. Who wouldn't? But what's your plan? What's your strategy? How are you going to get there? So the goal is, I want to make $1 million by the time I'm 25 or by the time I'm 30. What's your plan? What's your strategy? Now that you've got the goal and it's clear, now is when you're going to exert effort and persist until the goal is within reach.
You have researched on the effect of verbal self-guidance on motivation and performance, even about its relation to overcoming the employment barrier. Can you talk a little bit about verbal self-guidance?
Well, one of my mentors after I received my PhD was Albert Bandura. He just passed away at the age of 95 in July, but up until this summer, he had a very strong influence on me. And I was particularly interested in his empirical research on self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is defined as my belief, my conviction, my confidence that I can cause, I can bring about, I can make happen. And part of his theory is the effect of persuasion by a significant other. Now, while reading his social cognitive theory and work on self-efficacy, I also read about Don Meichenbaum. He's a clinical psychologist, work on functional and dysfunctional self-talk. And it occurred to me that depending on what you're telling yourself, you can either lower your confidence or increase your confidence. So I developed a way based on social cognitive theory, so there's theory influencing practice, and Don Meichenbaum's techniques in clinical psychology, so there's practice influencing theory, on how people could talk to themselves and boost their confidence, that even though they have been out of the workforce for so many weeks, so many months, so many years, they can still find a job. And one of the best experiments, field experiments I ever did was in Istanbul. And it was with women who had dropped out of the workforce and were now in their 40s, and the kids had grown and gotten jobs, and asking themselves, can I get a job? Can I ever get back in? And lots would say, no way, no one's going to want to hire someone my age. They're going to want a recent college student. And that's dysfunctional self-talk. But what if you changed it to, look at my experiences, look at the issues that I've overcome and resolved as a mother, look at the experiences I had before I left the workforce, look how more mature I am than the younger kids coming into the workforce. I'm confident I can get a job if I start applying. And sure enough, we had an experimental group and a control group. And with your smile, it looks like you've read the experiment. So you know the results happily showed that if you repeatedly said, yes, I can, as opposed to no, I can't, sure enough, you'd get a job. And it worked.
I looked this research and I asked this question.
Good, good. Oh, by the way, are you familiar with Michael Fraze's work on error management?
Can you repeat it?
Are you familiar with Michael Fraze, F-R-E-S-E? He's a German, and he's been in Singapore at the University of Singapore for quite some time. And he does work on error management.
Oh.
And he uses this technique with employees. So for example, when they make a mistake, an error, they're taught to say, great, I just made a mistake. what did I learn from this mistake? How am I smarter, wiser as a result of this mistake? So that rather than getting themselves disappointed and calling themselves stupid and I can't do this, it's the opposite. Yes, I made a mistake, but look, I won't do that again. I now know not to do that. I'm going to try this, this, and this. And it works very well relative to a control group.
Okay. Thanks for the information.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. You are the past president of the Canadian Association of Psychologists. What are the advantages and disadvantages of psychology as a professional group in Canada? For example, we are working for the professional law to be passed because we hope to avoid violations in the area.
Well, I'm not sure my answer applies to Europe, let alone to Turkey. Here's why I say that. In North America, United States, Canada, Mexico, we have psychology departments and we have business schools. And the business schools teach the MBAs and the PhDs IO psychology, but they call it human resource management. That's selection, performance training, performance management, performance appraisal, training and development. And they call it organizational behavior, which is leadership, motivation, decision-making, etc. They don't have to be licensed to practice. IO psychologists, some anyway, argue that we should be licensed. If you're going to require someone to be licensed in order to call themselves an industrial organizational psychology, students will just apply to the business school so they don't have to pay the money to be licensed, spend the time and energy to study to be licensed. Then you have to take continuing education credits every year to remain licensed. Requiring licensing in North America could lead possibly to the death of IO psychology in Canada, the US, and Mexico. And furthermore, you can't license what we as IO psychologists do in North America because we have organizations such as the Society for Human Resource Management. They have over 300,000 members. And they do the same things that we do, even though they only have a bachelor's degree. So we can license the name and say, you can't call yourself an industrial organizational psychologist if you're licensed, but we can't stop people from practicing the kinds of things we do just because they don't have a license. It just can't happen. We also have American Society of Training Directors, ASTD. Oh, and then we've got millions of MBAs who have received training in HRM and OB who are all practicing. We're not going to be able to stop them. It's just a lost cause in North America. Sorry.
Doesn't matter. Moving on to the next question. What do you think about the future of industrial organizational psychology?
Well, at the moment, it's extremely positive. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but as you know, I'm a past president of the Society of Industrial Organizational Psychology. And the membership is growing year after year after year, nonstop. And the majority of the people who are joining PSYOP are students. And what we are doing in PSYOP now, which I think is very smart, is elevating the status of students who have a terminal master's degree. And I have long argued that students with a terminal master's degree should have the same status, the same respect as anyone from business school with an MBA degree. And as we're elevating the status of the master's students, more and more of them are joining. And I think that bodes well for PSYOP and IO psychology. Not everyone needs to have a PhD to be an excellent practitioner of IO Psych.
Okay.
Is that a good answer for you or a terrible answer?
No, it's good answer.
You know, the PhD is really invaluable for research. PhD, invaluable for research. And as a researcher, you're going to be on the leading edge for practice in IO psychology. If you're a master's, it's unlikely you're going to do research, but if you read the journals, you'll be into evidence-based management and have a great career.
İrem?
Thank you.
You can go on.
Okay. What would you like to say to psychology students, especially those who want to turn to industrial and organizational psychology?
Well, I can only speak for myself. One, and I've already said this earlier, from my days as an undergraduate, I loved research. I loved coming up with ideas and testing them. I loved seeing them turn out to be effective with employees. And I'd be going, oh, darn, look at that, it worked. I wonder if I can replicate this. I loved puzzling if it didn't work, going, oh, darn, what the heck did I do wrong? Let me refigure this. So it was like being a detective, looking at the results and looking at the data and saying, I wonder how I can fix this. I love the feeling of knowing that I was improving the lives of others. And then you'll be happy to hear this. Being an industrial organizational psychologist, at least in North America, is very lucrative. So I earned an extremely good living for my family, which I was obviously happy about. And I have found, at least within PSYOP, the members of PSYOP are great, great colleagues, always willing to help. You don't have people who with stuck up noses or refusing to talk to you. It's easy to pick up the phone and call someone and get information as to how to do this or how to do that. So I would say, I know what I would say to students. Read an introductory textbook on industrial organizational psychology. And if, as you're reading the textbook, you go, wow, I really like this, then my prediction is this is a career you want to pursue. And if you're reading it and going, ugh, this is really boring, then you know you want to choose a career other than IO psychology. So that would be my advice.
That's true. Is there anything you want to add?
Well, the only other thing that just popped into my head as I was giving that answer, I would say the key to my success was having mentors. And to the extent possible, seek out a mentor, someone who really has a stake in your livelihood. So as an undergraduate, it was Dr. Beach, who wasn't impressed with my grades, but he was impressed with my ability to generate research topics. Then I had Dr. Ronan, and he became a mentor until the day I died. I'm still alive, till the day he passed away. And then a third mentor was Gary Uckel, the famous researcher in leadership, and he and I remain close to this day. And up until this summer, another mentor was Albert Bandura. And the reason why mentors are so good is they can point you in the right direction and alert you if you're going down the wrong path, the wrong direction. They just take a strong interest in your career. And I owe all my success to those four mentors.
Mentors are so important.
Yeah. Yes, very much. And you'll notice I implied, maybe I was more explicit, my grades were never the best. But I had mentors who would write to, let's say, graduate admissions committees and say, although this person has, might even say, terrible grades, here's why you should admit him. And obviously it carried weight because I got into a master's program and I got into a PhD program. And here I am being interviewed by you today.
Thank you so much.
You're more than welcome. Thank you for honoring me by this interview.
Glad to meet you.